Hey everyone. What's it been since August or something since I made a video? Reason for that being I've been working for Ocean, new pool on the block, with a very small amount of hash rate, with a lot of noise around it, a lot of attention being paid to that pool, despite having 0.2% of the hash rate. Something you'd think could be ignored given how controversial it is, um, or how disliked, I should say, it is by a small but very loud group of people that I'm increasingly suspicious of. So, to that end, here I go. I'll make another video. As usual, it will be a rambling stream of consciousness. And I guess I should start just becoming a bit like a politician at this point and just saying the same things over and over again. I always hate doing that because it's nice watching people say things that have just occurred to them and they're compelled to talk about like it's something new rather than someone just saying the same thing over and over again and repeating it. But at this point, I have gone on pretty much every major podcast in the Bitcoin space and given my perspective on the trajectory that we're on at the moment, how it's not a very good one, how we stand to lose almost everything that makes Bitcoin special and unique. And there's just a million places to start with that. So I guess it's always come down to me posing the question to people and saying, what makes Bitcoin Bitcoin? Why do we get to walk around and say there's Bitcoin and there's shitcoin? Why do we get to draw a line between those two things? Why do we get to say that what we have is unique? What is the unique characteristic Bitcoin has that separates it from the rest of crypto? Because they couldn't be more opposite, but there has to be something you can actually. It's not a metaphysical thing, even though it manifests that way. There are actual material things and qualities that and attributes that Bitcoin have that makes it unique, that gives it the kind of validity and robustness that it must have for us to treat it with the reverence we do. But that is a thing that can be lost if you don't know what you're doing and if you don't value what it is that makes it so. So, that being the case, I can't find a better definition and a better metric for gauging it than, well, really just a social, a remark on the social element from which everything else is downstream. And it comes from this cypherpunk ethos and this notion that humans are corruptible, and if you can create a system that treats everyone equally within it, where the rules can't be arbitrarily changed, then you have an unriggable game suddenly. And when you have an unriggable game, it comes down, you move away from things like privilege and you move towards things like hard work and skill and talent. And when you start rewarding things like hard work and skill and talent, you have just a better world for everyone to live in, which is the opposite of what the real world is doing at the moment, which is money gets siphoned away from anyone that wants to put any work or effort into anything that makes anything good, and towards a parasitic class of useless fuckheads that don't do anything except just suck humanity dry. And that bureaucratic evil class just gets bigger and bigger and bigger, and technology keeps improving, and people keep getting more and more broke because of just how upside down things are. And we know that's a result of the way the financial system works, the Cantillon effect, etc., etc. This is all just high-level Bitcoin philosophy, right? And it's fix the money, fix the world. We all know that, right? And it's easy to, I get down in the weeds and I forget about all that stuff. But when you get down deep enough in it, um, and when you're sincere enough with what it is you're encountering, you start seeing where the foundations to all this lie. And when you see those things and you start seeing that they get rickety, you get nervous because the thing can and will continue to exist in some shape or form, Bitcoin that is. And in doing so, it can become denatured and crappy, but just continue by virtue of how important it's become to all of us. My favorite thing to draw as an analogy is the internet itself, because once upon a time there was some incredibly idealistic people that built this set of protocols and decided this was going to free humanity. And what the internet ultimately became was not that. It does have some of those qualities, but at the same time, it's a massive piece of apparatus for the parasite class to use to surveil everyone and control everyone and just do so much damage at the same time. And I'm sorry, but the idealists and the people that brought about these things often don't spend too much time thinking about how badly things can go. So Bitcoin can, in the worst incarnation of it, can be a tool of the worst oppression and tyranny you can imagine. That is very much possible. It's possible with any digital currency. And it's perfectly possible with Bitcoin too. You just have to be aware of what trajectory it's heading on. So rewind like 3 minutes here. When I'm talking about those great qualities it does ideally have, and it does, I'm going to say that it's only afforded that as a result of the nodes. And that's the first video I made on this channel, and it will always be the focus of this channel because I believe you can't ever escape that as the priority, that the community that is upstream of everything else, all development decisions, all companies that survive in the space, ultimately they all need to respect some set of values that revolve around a prioritization of the ability of people to use Bitcoin permissionlessly. That doesn't mean cheaply, but it does mean permissionlessly. And that does imply that there needs to be a low enough cost to interact directly with the network and verify what you're doing when you're using it and not need the permission of third parties to use it. Now, there's a trade-off inherent to that. As I point out in the first video on this channel where I go over the whole fork wars thing, you have to trade off the ability to sync up with the network and interact with it directly without needing a middleman, with the ability to cheaply use what's available in block space as an ability to transact. And this was what the whole block size war was about, because I maintain that we won it, even though we didn't really win it exactly. But blocks didn't get, the people that wanted really big blocks had to disappear and make their own coin. They never cared about any of that trade-off. They just thought if Bitcoin becomes expensive to transact on, that's going to ruin everything. And they're not entirely wrong about that. But what they wanted to do to fix that was something way worse, which was make it incredibly expensive to run a node. And therefore, in a world where it's cheap to transact, but you can't run a node, you've undermined something more fundamental. It's better to have a Bitcoin that's more expensive to transact with, that's possible to interact with on all the other levels affordably, than the flip side, because there's a whole bunch of trade-offs with regard to so many of the decisions that have to be made, but that one's pretty watertight, and there's never a day that goes by where I don't regret that being a priority. But the premise of the war, the whole fork war, block size war, the entire premise of it was it must remain practical for everyday people to run nodes. And like I asked at the beginning of the video, what separates Bitcoin from shitcoins? It's, can you run a node or not? And go and look at Solana or Ethereum or any other shitcoin out there. And running a node is not something that's taken seriously by those communities. It's something that you might be able to do if you have enough time and money, but it will be difficult and very expensive. And when you try and every step of the way, you'll meet resistance, because it's just not something the network or its community caters to, because they don't actually care about decentralizing enforcement of the rules. When that becomes the case, then you just have centralization and you're back to fiat. That is a centralized currency and a centralized ecosystem by design, and you're never going to escape that. But the issue is Bitcoin can become that as a victim of its own success. So what am I talking about exactly here? What I've seen as of the last year, and I'm going to get into some detail on this, as of the last year, and I made a video on it, a bit longer than a year at this point, we saw people figure out ways to start stashing an inordinate amount of arbitrary data inside Bitcoin's blockchain, essentially turning the nodes into unpaid cloud storage. And that's not what they're there for. It's not what they consented to. And it's not the purpose of the Bitcoin network in general. Now, some people look at this and they go, it's a permissionless network. Someone found a way to hack some data into it. More power to them. It's all fun. And by the way, miners are going to make a bit more money sooner because the more use cases we have for people storing data in the blockchain, not just storing transactions as was designed, but other stuff like JPEGs and all that. If people want to store that inside the blockchain, miners make more money faster. That's a good thing, right? And if it becomes more expensive for people to do transactions, well, that was the premise of the fork wars anyway, right? We knew that miners had to make money for the network to be secure. So if they're making money now, isn't that a good thing? No, not in any practical sense, no. This is all just complete... None of these are good or compelling arguments, and none of them line up with reality at all. Not if you want to be practical about this thing. And I do maintain that Bitcoin is a practical project. It's all about solving theoretically unsolvable problems with practical solutions that are actually good enough to work. But if we maintain that pragmatic mentality, clogging up the blockchain with bullshit now disincentivizes people from running nodes and makes everyone do what the big blockers feared, which is everyone just uses custodial Bitcoin. And in a world where you have to ask permission to use your Bitcoin, which is what happens with custodial Bitcoin, and where you have there is no expectation of privacy, and there is also no real, it becomes harder, if not impossible, for you. Well, it undermines your motivation to verify how many coins there are, and the assumption that there are only 21 million Bitcoins becomes weaker and weaker. If you're moving money around in a centralized database because you can't afford to touch the actual blockchain itself, then who knows whether the third party that's moving that stuff around and allocating it from person A to person B actually has any Bitcoins or has as many as they claim, or if they're running a fractional reserve. That seems basically inevitable anyway. I do agree with the premise that the harder the asset and the easier it is to verify, the less you can get away with having fractionally reserved third-party custodians. But there's always going to be some degree of it, and the less there is, the better, because it's going to corrupt and pollute and undermine the price discovery mechanism if there are fake Bitcoins floating around on spreadsheets all over the place. The more of us that run nodes and the more of us that interact directly with the chain, the less that's possible. So that's to be encouraged. And like I say, it is the one thing that separates Bitcoin from shitcoins, is the fact that you can run a node and you can interact directly with the network. This has to remain the central priority of the entire community, and all development decisions should respect that as a priority. That is where we can smugly say we're Bitcoin, we're not just another crypto. It's that. And it's not just that you have that mentality or you're an Austrian economist or whatever. It's not that. That needs to actually manifest in a set of priorities that has at the absolute trunk of the tree, can you run a node or not? So what I'm seeing, it's when you butcher the use case of the blockchain and add in additional things, as has been done over this last year and a half, you undermine all sorts of principles. And who knows how many details I'm going to get into here and how many I'm going to miss. We have the introduction of Segwit, right? And Segwit cleverly targeted a specific problem in Bitcoin as part of what it did by creating two classes of transactions, and some would be cheaper than others. And this was done to take some burden off nodes, and it's ironically backfired. But the idea was the UTXO set is one of the most expensive parts of the Bitcoin ecosystem from a node's perspective. A UTXO being an amount of Bitcoin that you might hold in any one chunk of Bitcoin. So if I send you some Bitcoin, you have a UTXO. If you then spend that, and there's change when you spend that, that's the creation of two UTXOs after that. It's, you can have a $100 bill, or you can have $10 bills, or five $20 bills. If you break an $100 bill into 10,000 pennies, that's a lot more expensive because all the nodes effectively have to verify each penny to see if they're real rather than one $100 bill. You're talking about something that is 10,000 times more expensive from the perspective of a node. So Segwit had this incentive structure to it, saying if you consume, it's cheaper to consume inputs rather than create outputs when you make transactions. So what this was supposed to do was prevent the growth of the UTXO set, or slow it down, or incentivize it to actually get smaller. All of these things, and it was witness data was given a 4x discount in this, this bit outside the block that actually was why we didn't effectively win the block size war like we might pretend we did. And this is something I got wrong in that video way back when I started the channel 4 or 5 years ago at this point. Wow. Yeah, blocks are bigger. They're not 1 megabyte anymore. They're on average, they're like 1.5. And there was a theoretical maximum of 4 megabytes, which was never supposed to happen, but has started happening. So, man, I'm going all over the place in this, but maybe some of you are listening to this when you've just had the coffee hit and you're just able to process it all. So I'm going to keep going for it anyway. So there you have the introduction of the witness discount, and it created 2 classes of transactions. And it had, sadly now it's had the opposite effect, because people have found a mechanism whereby they can stash essentially as much arbitrary data as they like, and it's classed as witness data. And that means it gets a massive discount. And this is where they're storing JPEGs and other data which, nodes have not consented to. It's not a thing that they're interested in storing for you. You're just abusing a public resource and acting like it's something that will never disappear. And that you have a right to, all you have to do is pay a miner enough to put it in the blockchain, and once it's in there, it becomes the node's problem because they have to store it forever, and they have no incentive to do that, and they're what keeps Bitcoin, right? So that's no good. And the fact that they get to do it at a discount versus people just using and doing transactions normally fucks everything, because it turns that should be self-evident, right? Not only can you use Bitcoin for something for which it's not intended, which is an abuse of the nodes, and it's not that it's just not without consequence, it's that it's actually there's an advantage to the people doing this attack, and it is an attack, and that is unequivocal. Go and look at Greg Maxwell saying because it's an attack, and they declare it outright. You've had people that are coming up with these schemes. One guy was using bare multisig, which is a method of multisig that no one uses for its intended purpose, that Luke, back in 2014, tried to say, can we turn this off by default, please? And he was railroaded, as usual. Luke is the hero at this whole story, by the way, as he usually is. And some of this is even his fault, but at least he's aware that he's created a bad situation rather than the people that... I digress. I'll get back to Luke in a minute. So bare multisig is not witness data, stuff like that. It's people creating fake public keys where you can store data. And, there's a very expensive way to do it, but it's also for the spammer, but it's also very expensive for nodes, right? Because again, you're bloating the UTXO set. And there's no real safe way that I can figure out to troll through the whole blockchain and delete all the fake public keys off your node. And no one's going to do that. Like, someone wrote a fork to do it, or some sort of custom patch you can apply. For a bunch of reasons, that's not going to happen. And this was done for fun as an attack. And the guy said, I want to do something really annoying now. I want to do the least efficient thing possible when I'm spamming the network. And there's a few of us, the Ocean team specifically, come along and we say, all right, we're mining, and obviously we're using Bitcoin knots because all this stuff is fixed in knots, and Luke's the main maintainer of knots, and Luke is also the CTO of Ocean. So that whole thing kind of fit together. We did this giant launch where we talk about how fucked mining is, because mining is completely centralized and getting worse and worse by the hour, and the Bitcoin space seems to be completely asleep to it. So we launch, and we do what I consider to be one of the best Bitcoin events that's happened. I was proud to be a part of it. We didn't talk about any of the spam stuff because there's too much else going on. And then there's a massive controversy that erupts once people start looking at the block templates, the proposed blocks. Before we even find a block, people go, wait a minute, this doesn't line up with what's in Bitcoin Core. You guys are censoring valid transactions. And we got accused of censorship. And this is like in a monumental fuck up and totally my fault. I just didn't anticipate any of that happening. I didn't know people were this ignorant about how Bitcoin works and has always worked. Every single person out there running a Bitcoin node censors valid transactions because, like with any fucking protocol on the planet, you can use a protocol and you can abuse a protocol. And protocols that get laid to the waste, thrown to the side by maintainers that don't give a shit, get only abused and then abandoned. Think what your email would be if there was no spam filtration. It would just be unfucking usable. Imagine getting a phone call every 3 minutes from it's bad. It's bad enough as it is. Look how much spam you get anyway. Look how many junk phone calls you get. And that's with an active effort being made by everyone involved in that system of telephony, trying to counteract it and make the user experience passable, right? Bitcoin is no different. You have to make it so that what is actually going in the chain is not malicious and directed at the people that are going to have to store that data forever. Bitcoin it's the exact opposite of what people think when it comes to spam. People think because it costs money to get spam in the chain through transaction fees, we have a built-in solution for spam anyway. We actually miraculously don't need to worry about it. It's the exact opposite of that. In no circumstance in any protocol is spam free. It always costs money to spam people using a certain protocol, right? Getting around Gmail's filters or Hotmail's filters, like email is super centralized and they have a closed system. If you set up your own email server and you try and start emailing people on Gmail and Hotmail and Apple or whatever, very good chance your email never shows up in anyone's inbox, because to be in that club is expensive and time consuming, and you have to stay one hop ahead in that game of cat and mouse. So when you get some email from a Nigerian prince, that guy didn't just spin up a server on a Raspberry Pi and email 10,000 people and it just showed up. That costs time and money, and he has to keep moving and moving and moving. Now, that is to get the email to you. The difference with spam email to spam in the blockchain is that if you get your spam in the blockchain, every single Bitcoiner has to download what you just did for the rest of eternity and store it for the rest of eternity. And that can be done for a 20-cent transaction fee, given the current price of Bitcoin. There's never been a more efficient way to waste people's time and money than spamming Bitcoin nodes, because it's so cheap and it's so persistent and so resilient until it isn't anymore. And this is just not well understood at all. So Ocean came out and it was just obvious to us that we were going to fix this. But again, the literacy around how people's nodes don't work. People said, these are valid transactions. How dare you define these as spam? And I said, spam is always valid at the protocol level. Any email you receive that's a spam email is a valid, it abides by the rules of the SMTP protocol. If someone is yelling at you and you don't want to hear what they have to say, I don't care whether their words are correct English or not. That's not the fucking point. The point is that I do not want to hear what they have to say, for whatever reason that is. And yes, you can talk about censorship, but censorship is a very specific thing. Censorship usually involves some sort of state actor pushing you to restrict behavior that's accessible to some people but not others. And there was never any intention behind who is doing the spamming. It was how they're using the chain. So this is my analogy that I frankly think is an excellent analogy for this. I liken it to a high street. An old school high street with cars driving down it in a functional town with decent infrastructure that one day gets flooded to the point where you can still drive down bits of it, but actually it becomes also practical for people to start sailing down it in little boats. And they start doing that, and it starts to look a bit like Venice. And I'm saying people's taken the Bitcoin as Venice romanticization of it as a metaphor too literally. Riding boats down a high street is not what it's for, right? And they start getting in the way of the traffic. But more to the point, the boat riders like their ability to do this. They start blocking off sewer drains in order to flood the road more frequently. They make it more and more difficult for the car drivers in this analogy being people that you want to use Bitcoin to make financial transactions rather than spoof financial transactions to store kilobytes of arbitrary data and, again, treat nodes as unpaid cloud storage, because only the miners get any money for this. People running nodes just have to pay to store all this crap and simultaneously have to pay more expensive transaction fees too to compete with this other use case that was never there by design. So the malicious boat riding users don't care about the fact that that road is not there for them. They're making life annoying and difficult for the car drivers. And they're also paying no regard to the fact that if they keep doing this, people are going to stop buying cars. And if people stop buying cars, there's going to be no roads anymore. Because you're undermining the entire motivation for the infrastructure you're being a parasite on to even continue to exist. So the thing just it slowly disappears and suddenly there's nothing, and you're back to the tragedy of the commons scenario. There was a thing, we used this thing in a way it wasn't designed, we didn't care about the longevity of it, we selfishly came along and went, we'll just use it in a way that benefits us in the short term. Now there's no more thing. That's what happens if you treat nodes like unpaid cloud storage, because they're not that. Why would anyone want to provide redundancy for your cloud storage? They're not going to do it out of the goodness of their heart. And Bitcoin maintaining its set of values by having an orientation around the importance of nodes and what, gives us this validity when we say we're Bitcoin, we're not shitcoin. That was always going to be a struggle as Bitcoin gained more and more adoption and one order of magnitude more people used it each bubble. That was always going to be a problem. But now it's just gotten so much worse because we've been inundated, thanks to Bitcoin Magazine and these other complete fuckheads that have decided we can kill crypto by absorbing all of that contingent and saying, hey, we can do NFTs, we can do JPEGs, we can do all this crap on chain, we'll kill all the shitcoins. Again, if you gaze into the abyss gazes back into you. You don't ruin crypto by turning Bitcoin into a shitcoin. You just turn Bitcoin into a shitcoin. Because none of these people that are in here that are gambling on runes or ordinals or any of that stuff care about the ability to run a node. They couldn't care less. It's not even a part of the conversation. None of the miners care about people's ability to run a node unless they're clever and forward-thinking. But increasingly, as Bitcoin becomes more and more of a victim of its own success, people don't understand what the foundation is. They don't see below the surface. They don't see what's holding the whole fucking thing up. If you don't have any nodes, you just have an arbitrary set of rules that can be changed by a small group of people and you're back to fiat. The only thing that gives you any resilience against that is tens of thousands of nodes at the very least. And that needs to go up, not down. So where are we at? I'm doing benchmarks. I've synced 1 billion Bitcoin nodes in my life. As part of the work I did at Start9, it was all about plebs running nodes, making cheap hardware that can easily, with one click, install and run a Bitcoin node, and for it not to be too tedious an experience. Something realistic, something affordable, right? And then you can have pre-configured Lightning nodes sitting on top of it and your own self-hosted block explorers and join market and all that brilliant stuff that you want, that you actually need your node for in order to, sit on top of. You're connecting your phone to Lightning wallets and things like that. This is all great. And I worked for years doing this stuff, but I got a lot of experience at that level, right? So when Jameson Lopp and these other assholes come along and do a benchmark for syncing a Bitcoin Core node, and they're like, oh, hey, I did it in 11 hours. Last year I did it in, 10.3 hours. We're fine. Yeah, what was the level of the system you were working on? Did it have 128 gigabytes of RAM? That's not how you get tens of thousands of people running nodes. You need it to be like downloading an app and for it to just work. You have to keep aiming down, not up, when it comes to the barriers you present people. So, to that end, what I had most experience with was syncing a Bitcoin node on a Raspberry Pi 4 with 8 gigabytes. Back in 2022, that would take just under 48 hours. I did it a bunch. Like, people that have followed this channel for a while know I was in Mexico for most of the COVID drama. And, I had pretty crap internet, and I could always sync a node in under 2 days. I'd done it on every drive you can think of. and I've done it, so many times. Now we finally have the Raspberry Pi 5. It's twice as powerful, the CPU, and I can't get that thing to sync in under a week. I'm about to benchmark it again with NVMe instead of USB connected storage because that could be a factor. But the point is, it took how many years for us to go from Raspberry Pi 4 to Raspberry Pi 5, and we're nowhere near keeping up with the rate of growth in not just the blockchain, but really just the UTXO set. So back to the UTXO set and how it affects benchmarking, like I said, one of the ways in which Segwit was designed was specifically to try and shrink the UTXO set because we know how expensive it is for nodes. Spammers have been blowing that up. In February 2023, which is just around when all this started, the UTXO set was around 100 million. Now it's at around 185 million. So it's almost doubled. In fact, I think it's doubled since just before 2023. So in about 18 months, we've seen a doubling of the UTXO set. And that was enormously expensive. And it should be setting off alarms because suddenly we're losing the ability to sync Bitcoin nodes on cheap hardware. This should be enough to make everyone start running around with their heads on fire, but no one cares. I haven't seen any interest in that at all, and it used to be we fought a war over this shit, we won it because of how much of a priority it was for our community, and now no one cares. That inspires such a low amount of confidence that it brings me to dismay. It really does. So, and it's not like I'm making up a value set out of nowhere. I can point to all the parts in history where I say, this is why that decision was made. I'm going to get to op return in a minute, but I've spoken about the motivation for the witness discount specifically to shrink the UTXO set. But the ability to store data in the witness section at a discount has led to bloating of the UTXO set. Though the spam that bloats the UTXO set is a little unrelated to the witness data, so I don't want to be disingenuous in how I present that, but it's all part of the same degradation of what is prioritized in this space and what informs development decisions. So when we came out, the Ocean guys, who basically are the one company in the space who seem to have a problem with this and seem to be aware of it, not really surprising to anyone who knows their history because it's Luke. And Luke was the only guy that wanted Segwit in the first place. Again, Luke is basically the responsible for a lot of the problems we have today, but is also the only one that cares about fixing them. I don't know if that's guilt or whatever, but the point is, there's Segwit was something that it happened on a dead chain. You just had Bitcoin get accosted by a bunch of disingenuous big blockers and people that had no technical clue whatsoever that just wanted to blow block size up to ridiculous levels to the point where no one could run a node anymore in the hopes that, people could transact cheaply for longer. And, basically they wanted centralization because centralization is efficient and cheap. Which is fine until the government shuts it down, and Bitcoin did literally nothing different to all of the precursors to it that were all trying to do what Bitcoin did but were centralized, and therefore they get shut down. The whole point of Bitcoin is you have to decentralize it so that it can't be shut down. So if you want, that makes it inefficient, right? Decentralization is necessarily much less efficient than centralization. I digress somewhat, but the point is, they were completely incompetent, the big blockers. They forked off and made Bitcoin Cash and Segwit 2x, and that was just not even written properly, and the whole thing collapsed in a hilarious story. Go and read the Block Size Wars, or go and watch the first video on this channel. I promise I won't mention it again in this video. But then you also had, you had Core, Bitcoin Core, that just basically said, okay, we want Segwit, but we want the miners to activate it, and they're not doing it, so I guess that's that then. And that was like this legendary mistake, that we tell our grandkids about now when we're like, look, you don't ask the miners if they want to give you an upgrade or not. The miners are not. It's never appropriate to ask the low-level employees of an organization whether they want something that should be a high-level management decision, right? Like, that's not to imply a hierarchy of that of that sort of pyramid structure. It's more just. It's actually the opposite. The pyramid's upside down. It's if the majority, the actual node users, want some functionality. It's not up to the miners who are a minority, but they're a well-paid minority to do a specific job. You don't ask that the security team whether or not they want to change the nature of the thing they're guarding. That's just a completely inappropriate thing to do. They're there to guard what it is. They're there to guard this thing. And that thing gets to autonomously decide what it is and then pay for its security. You don't ask the security what the thing should be, right? That would be completely inappropriate. So that was how that played out. And Core basically just said, we accept the fact that the miners aren't allowing us to have this upgrade. And then Luke was the only Core dev that stood out there and said, well, it's up to the users, not the miners. And if the miners aren't going to do their job, we will fire them, or we will start rejecting their blocks or whatever. And people are like, you're crazy, you can't do this. Oh, it worked. And then we had Segwit, and now it's being abused and no one wants to fix it. So that's kind of a bit of history there. So I'm trying to think where I am in this whole. This is your first video of mine you've watched. This is much more coherent than I'm usually capable of. This is all flowing kind of well. So what I'm getting at here is I can point to the precedent that has been set for the actions taken by this tiny minority, me and Luke and Jason and the rest of the Ocean team. Like, we're a tiny group of people that everyone is just saying you're ridiculous and you want to censor Bitcoin and all this stuff. I'm saying it's never been censorship, right? So first off, that was the lesson I wish I'd been able to teach everyone about at the Ocean launch. I wish I'd been able to say, look at your node. There's a massive history behind this thing called op return. And that to me is just an open and shut case. People were storing arbitrary data in Bitcoin. It was annoying. People didn't like it. And there was an active stance taken against it by Greg, by Satoshi, by Luke, by Vladimir, by Jeff Garzik, by pretty much all of the old guard. And you have Gavin Andreessen saying, my evil little mind wants to think of a way to upload Lady Gaga videos into the blockchain. And, well, we all know what happened with him, right? It doesn't even... that wasn't even him expressing, a desire for it to be there. In fact, it's even an admission of the fact that this is an evil thing to do. Like, people are running Bitcoin nodes for their own benefit, but it benefits all of us, the fact that they want to do it and they're motivated to do it and they do it. So if you start making life annoying for them and they stop, then it's over. Like, we need people to mine to secure the network. And the understanding of that is, don't worry, they'll be paid to do it. And we're very worried about the idea that they might not be paid to do it in the future. We need nodes more than we need miners, and they're not paid. So if you start storing gigabytes of crap on them, then the fact that they might stop is of much greater concern, because they have less economic incentive to do it anyway. Most people don't run nodes. Every year, the percentage of Bitcoiners there are versus the percentage of Bitcoiners that run nodes gets bigger and bigger and bigger. The gap between the two, or the discrepancy, the percentage of real Bitcoiners using nodes, the first-class citizens, that drops and drops and drops. And it's something like, probably it can be a cube root of the total amount of Bitcoiners there are. And the trouble with things like that is, if you have a cube root is a tiny amount. So if you have, tens of millions of Bitcoiners, you can have a few thousand people running nodes, right? But the problem is those few thousand might just not one day. And when that happens, you have this ecosystem with tens of millions of people in it, but all of the weight left. The anchor holding the whole system in place is gone, and we've run over the edge of the cliff, and we haven't looked down yet. That's the kind of situation I'm talking about. It's what happens in companies a lot. It's why you get these dead companies sometimes that just make garbage products that still kind of exist, that were great a decade ago. And it's because there were like 4 or 5 really awesome people working in the company that quit. And now you have thousands of people left in this giant monstrosity of a company. None of them are particularly good. None of them have any vision, and the company's just a zombie. That happens all the time, and you can have exactly the same thing with the Bitcoin network, because you need that anchor of nodes. So back to op return. There's a great article called The Op Return Wars that goes into some of the history of this stuff. And basically, and Jason was a part of this. Jason runs the back end for Ocean. Jason was saying it's ridiculous. People can store loads of data inside fake public keys, and he uploaded the lyrics to some Disturbed song in it just to prove a point, right? At this point, it was like, I'm attacking to show you that this attack is possible and to help motivate a solution. So op return was the solution. You can create a provably prunable output. So a node out there can tolerate the fact that there is an approved way to store data in Bitcoin. But if you're going to do this, don't worry, the nodes have only approved it because the mechanism by which it will be stored is something that can be removed without a node ever having to worry about needing that data. So we can wipe out all the op return data on any particular node and not care about it, because we know that those are UTXOs that are unspendable. You don't need to spend sats in the op return output. You can if you want. They'll just be burnt sats that can never be spent again. You will have to spend sats to get the transaction in the chain in the first place. That's definitely true. That's not true of anyone that makes their own blocks. That's different. But they are only losing sats by virtue of not using that block space for something else. And in the current environment, blocks are always full, except for empty blocks. But those are, I'll get into empty blocks in a minute because it's kind of funny. That's a thing that Ocean have been attacked for a lot. And it's really funny because no one understands why blocks are empty. Every single person, every single legendary person in Bitcoin I've spoken to doesn't actually understand why empty blocks happen. And I wrote a correction on Mempool's explainer for empty blocks that was wrong, that explained why they actually happen, and then that got merged, and then Matt Corallo came along and said it was nonsense and then made it wrong again. And this is really funny to me because like I can't tell you how many legends I've spoken to in the space that don't understand why empty blocks happen and why they're a good thing and why they're necessary, and also why the fact that they happen far more than they should is not anything to do with anything any pool does. Anyway, back to op return. So the fact that op return is there represents this compromise that was made, saying if you're going to store arbitrary data in the blockchain, here is a way by which you can do it. And I call this the cat flap. So another one of mechanics fun analogies that I've developed over the last 8 months of doing a million podcasts. So we have this front door on the house, and if you're a Bitcoin transaction, you can get in through the front door. We also added a cat flap, which allows a certain amount of crap, or, a cat to get in. If you're an elephant, you cannot get in through the cat flap. That's what's going on at the moment, right? The spam at the moment that's taking advantage of the witness data and something that happened because of Taproot. Those things are elephants that have wandered in and are obviously much bigger than the cat flap. The cat flap, which is op return, is a very exquisitely controlled size that by default in Bitcoin Core at the moment is 83 bytes. So you never see op returns bigger than that. And this is all about spam filters and all that, which I'm probably going to have to get into in this video. But the point is, Knots had a smaller op return size. Knots had a smaller cat flap than Core did. And this affected Samurai Wallet because they liked to store data about who's already done a coin join and who hasn't, so that they can figure out who, goes for free in the next round and the next round and the next round. They would like to store that all in this, again, using nodes as though they were some sort of abusable public cloud storage. They like to make that redundant data, available on chain. And they used something like 46 bytes of op return, which meant it didn't make it into Ocean's blocks. And they put out a massive stink about how we're censoring coin joins. Now, obviously we don't. Ocean's blocks are full of coin joins. They're just from other implementations. And we didn't even do anything to Samurai's actual coin joins. It was just the pre-commits that were affected by this, because they basically are saying, not only do we want to transact, we want to also store a bunch of arbitrary data too. And we want to store this much of it. And the amount of data they were storing, was bigger than what was allowed when Luke set that variable in Bitcoin Knots in 2014, which was years before Samurai ever existed, and that variable never got changed. So that was a ridiculous and annoying thing to deal with, because a lot of people were like, oh my God, the CIA pool, they're blocking coin joins. And again, this is just such nonsense, because our blocks are full of coin joins from competent. I'm not going to get too bitchy here, but Join Market and Wasabi are far, far better. They're privacy by design, not privacy by policy, which we all know is superior. All that ended up in our blocks. So, this was ridiculous. And then a few months later, Samurai got shut down, and something, this just, I don't even want to talk about it because that's just a horrible thing. I don't, like Giacomo said it best, like, I hate the Department of Justice for making me have to defend Samurai. Anyone that knows me knows I'm not a fan of that project. That was probably a motivation for them, assuming bad faith on our part when their transactions weren't making it into ocean blocks. Fair enough, that whole thing could have been handled better, but again, how it was presented and how most people perceive it has nothing to do with reality. So, back to op return. There's less of it allowed in knots than there is in core, but the point is there's still a line drawn by every node on the network that runs default core the way it runs. And if you want to store a 90-byte op return and you broadcast that to the network, the nodes are going to censor you in accordance with how that word has been denatured. That's how everyone is using that word now when they talk of censorship. And it's bullshit. All it is someone saying, there's the front door. If you're a transaction, you will be able to fit in through that front door. If you're not, and you want to store arbitrary data, which we don't like, we've been actively hostile to it forever. 1 million of you have said, fuck you guys, I'm going to go and develop on Ethereum then. So many of you have done that. And we've said, that's fine. This is not what Bitcoin is for. That's never censorship. Again, saying that people can drive wherever they want is not the same as saying you can drive whatever you want, including boats down this fucking high street. Saying, no, that's ridiculous. You're undermining what it's for. No one can drive their cars anymore because there are boats everywhere, and you keep flooding the road to make the thing more conducive to what you want to do, which makes it unusable for a bunch of cars. Trying to maintain any sort of sanity in infrastructure like a system like roads or like Bitcoin is not censorship. It's design. I'm not saying you can put data in, you can't. I'm saying this is too much data. We've decided the cat flap is the tolerable amount. And if you're doing something, if you are a cat, you need to be of this size. If you are not a human being, you need to be able to fit through this thing here. So the idea that it got framed as censorship, I was like, okay, if it's censorship, sure, but are you aware that you're doing that on your node? Are you aware that if someone has an 84-byte op return, you are going to reject that transaction? It's never going to make its way to a miner, and you won't see any of that stuff in blocks, ever. Are you aware of any of that? Because you don't seem to be. You don't seem to be aware that Bitcoin is censoring what you, in accordance with your definition of it. It's a stupid definition because censorship can actually happen in Bitcoin, especially given how centralized mining is at the moment. Censorship is a very different thing. If the governments were coming to us and saying you can't include transactions done by these people, or you can't allow people to spend from this blacklist of UTXOs, that's censorship. Saying people have found a bug in Bitcoin and are using it to get around the size of the cat flap because they've kicked in the wall on the side of the living room and now there's elephants walking in. Getting rid of that is not censorship. That's saying the house is fucked and it's going to fall down because there's a bug. These are very different things. Fixing bugs and unintended usage is always censorship from the political bullshitting that the people exploiting the bug do, but that doesn't change the fact that it's still bug abuse. So, yeah, the cat flap doesn't work anymore because there's a much bigger hole and it's also 4 times cheaper to use than walking through the cat flap, so everyone just uses that instead. So what Knots did was it updated the variable that controls the size of op return and makes it 42 bytes in Knots and 83 bytes in core, and said we're going to use that to control the living room side as well. We're going to restore the wall on the living room. We're going to put in a second cat flap that works exactly the same way the one on the front door does. So basically we're just restoring order and making things how they were before. And everyone lost their minds over it. This is censorship. You're destroying Bitcoin. You're creating a negative precedent. This is how the government will attack us if they do. And I'm just looking at it aghast, going, all we're doing is making Bitcoin work the way it used to work. Because if you look at any block now, it's 90% data storage. And I'm sorry, but the tens of thousands of nodes on the network didn't sign up for that. They don't consent to it, and they're not going to be motivated to continue to store that. So all that is tragedy of the commons, like I said, and it collapses. And my main point here is we have precedent for all this. If you know your Bitcoin history, you know that what we're doing is consistent. If it's censorship now, fair enough. But why wasn't it censorship then? The only steel man I can give is that we, instead of coming up with a cat flap before we even built the structure, instead, we built the structure, realized we left the wall off of the side of the living room, elephants started walking in, and then we decided we needed another wall with a cat flap in it. So we're doing things in the wrong order. And I agree that that is more reminiscent of censorship. We want to stop something after it started happening rather than preemptively before it started. But I'm sorry, go one level deeper and it doesn't make any difference. It breaks the system. Whether you figure out that there is a bug before you do an upgrade or after you do an upgrade doesn't change the fact that it's a bug or not. So the fact that spammers are making loads of money by scamming on Bitcoin instead of shitcoins, the fact that they can do that kind of, they can trick people and bamboozle them into thinking that something is solid when it isn't. That's the fact that they can do that is frustrating. Because they will do it. And again, there's just not enough intelligence to foresee the fact that if you can gamify a spam attack to the point where enough people will be motivated to start buying JPEGs on Bitcoin, even though we know it's all bullshit and it's all going to collapse like every other shitcoin scheme, they will keep iterating and they will keep doing it. And it's far more effective as a censorship attack than anything else because it doesn't actually cost that much money. You only need tens of millions, which is not a lot. To be honest, that's an overblown figure anyway, because this is what people are saying miners are earning from permitting all this arbitrary data to be stored on nodes. So all that, I hope I've rounded off that point fairly concisely. So we have a precedent for it. It's well established. It's rock solid. It's just that there aren't the same level of guts around in core development anymore. Vladimir hopefully is back, and he was one of the most outspoken critics of arbitrary data storage, telling these people to fuck off and just laughing at them when they said, well, I'm going to go and develop on Ethereum then. Okay, bye. That was the attitude they had back then. And Jeff Garzik did too before he, just became a complete psychopath, as far as I can tell, with Segwit 2x, which fortunately he completely fucked up. So it broke and didn't even work right. I digress again. So there's all that stuff. The spam filters, I think I've just about covered it now. All I'm saying is that Knots comes along and says, okay, well, we need the cat flap. We need there to not be in it. If there's a space whereby animals can get in that isn't the cat flap, that's bigger than the cat flap, and it's cheaper than the cat flap, then why do we have the cat flap? Can someone please explain what that's actually fucking for? Because we must have it for a reason, right? So now we have this exquisitely controlled cat flap that we had a massive fight over whether it's 42 bytes instead of 46 bytes. Meanwhile, as I said, a quarter of the price, everyone's walking in through the elephant-sized hole in the living room door. This is an incoherent system. So I'm out here saying fix the filters. Make everything forced to go through the cat flap again, right? We can debate what size it needs to be or if we have one or not. But right now, why do we have that thing? It doesn't make any sense. Get rid of it or fix it, but don't leave it broken. So we have these broken filters in Bitcoin. And they're so broken that people don't realize they're there. And they don't realize the reason that they're there. And they're saying if it's consensus valid, it goes in the blockchain. And if you ever block that, that's censorship. And this is such a crude and simplistic understanding of it. And it really is as dumb as saying, someone phones you up and says, hi, this is Michael, I'm Microsoft, I want to have your password. Like, if someone phones up and does that, you're not going to sit there and go, this is a valid phone call. Like, that is that stupid. Yes, it's a valid phone call. It's using the protocol that the phone company desires your cell phone talks and all that stuff. It's using the internet or whatever. But the person's trying to scam you. The person is doing an attack on you, right? It doesn't matter that it's valid. So what these people are doing, they're not just attacking you, they're attacking the entire network at once. They're bastardizing its use case. And like, as I hope is clear with my, high street analogy with boats riding down, high streets, making it unusable for cars, if you do that too long, there just won't be cars and there won't be roads, and then you don't have any infrastructure anymore. So I'm not talking about central planning here, but at the same time, Bitcoin is pretty centralized when it comes to that stuff. It's not great. It's not something we're proud of. But if it's centralized and actively doing harmful things to itself, I can't think of anything worse than that. So all this to me just speaks to the fact that we've become culturally corrupt and undermined. We've had a massive influx of shitcoiners that call themselves Bitcoiners that say, oh, if we can get all the shitcoining done on Bitcoin, that's even better, right? We'll bring people into the space. Like if we scam people using Bitcoin, surely they'll stick around and become hodlers, right? That's literally the inanity of the arguments that I've seen being made, and it's super depressing because it's what we watched Brian Armstrong do on Coinbase for years. Say it's about crypto, not Bitcoin, and if people come in, if they come in and they get scammed on some silly Dogecoin or whatever, they'll learn about Bitcoin in the process, and it's a pathway to adoption. No, they fucking won't. They'll get scammed and they'll leave, and they'll be done forever. And when you say, hey, I'm a Bitcoiner, they'll go, oh, I lost loads of money on that. And you say, what do you mean? They go, what did you buy? Well, I bought some ETH and I bought some Dogecoin and I bought some Solana. And I'm like, you never even touched Bitcoin, but it's contaminated in your mind for decades because you got scammed on something that looked like Bitcoin that was actually the polar opposite. That's all that's happening with these scams. So it's that element of that undermining of Bitcoin's purpose is just, it's evil in so many ways. It's so undermining and so insidious. Even worse is the ordinals scam specifically. That one really hurts because they're trying to attack one of the base characteristics of the notion of fungibility, right? That's defined in Bitcoin as it was, at inception, was that Bitcoins are fungible. 1 Bitcoin equals 1 Bitcoin. And because the only reason you can say this is because they are sizes. It's like saying 1 kilometer equals 1 kilometer by definition. This is not I'm not being frivolous here in how I talk about this. This is a very important thing because we're talking about a unit of measurement, and those are defined by what they are, right? They're not defined by I think it's specifically that's what an ordinal number is. Like if you're talking about football player. No, I'm wrong here because there's 3 kinds, but I think this might be right. If you're talking about football player, like the guy with 7 on the back of his shirt, that is player number 7. There is no other player number 7. When it comes to a UTXO that is 7 Bitcoins in size, it doesn't matter. There is no concept of what those Bitcoins are or what the sats are that make it up. And when you spend it, they get destroyed and made into new UTXOs that are of different sizes or of the same size, but the sats don't persist. That doesn't work that way. Bitcoin does not have any ordinal notion to it natively. So applying this heuristic on top of it that tries to say, the first sat of any block that's mined is a unique and rare Satoshi. This is a fundamental attempt to change the nature of what goes on. It tries to create a transferability. So fungibility is essential to money. You can't. They're trying to destroy it, of course, but with all money, not just Bitcoin. But it's very important that you don't need to care about the $10 bill in your pocket being a specific bad $10 bill versus another $10 bill, which is a good one. That was enshrined into law as a concept. It's an abstract representation of something that is equivalent in all units, right? So 1 kilometer is 1 kilometer. There is not a bad kilometer. There's not a bad degree. This is probably the best analogy I have for it. It's not 20 degrees one day and you're worried it gets hotter up to 21 degrees because that might be an illegal degree. Like when it goes from 20 to 21 degrees, that was a bad degree. Oh, that was one of those bad degrees you hear about on the news. No, because there is no difference between any degree. They are all just units of the amount of something. They are not a specific thing. So UTXO-A, UTXO-B, UTXO-C, all of these things in Bitcoin, they are just sizes of UTXOs. The actual sats in them, there's no such thing. They don't exist. Just like, it's 200 miles from here to Victoria for me, or whatever. That is not those unique miles. I can't be building something somewhere else and accidentally one of those miles from somewhere else ended up here. That's not what a mile is. It's an abstract notion, right? So they're trying to say, oh, they're trying to create this new lens on it. I'm not doing a very good job explaining this, unfortunately, but hopefully I've made something clear about it, because if people are going to insist on interpreting UTXOs as being non-fungible in the way that they're trying to do here, then suddenly you have to care. You have to care about what your UTXOs are. To some extent, there's always this anti-money laundering crap and KYC as a matrix that's been imposed on Bitcoin for over a decade now anyway, and it sucks, and we're way past the point of return on any of that anyway, to the extent that if you have a Bitcoin in a wallet somewhere and it came from somewhere naughty, you're probably going to get in trouble for it, even though even though Bitcoin is fungible and Bitcoin doesn't care, it's neutral with regard to when you spend it. But a sort of gamified attack on that takes that assumption, or operates on that level, where it tries to make it fun and tries to say, hey, Bitcoin, not only is it not fungible, but you can make more money if you have the right SAT. That is making people enthusiastically undermine the neutrality of what a UTXO is to the network. That's a horrible thing to do, and it's not something you want to encourage at all. That is fundamentally an undermining of fungibility as a principle of Bitcoin, and it needs to be fungible. Gold would not work if one gold atom did not equal one other gold atom. That wouldn't work. Yes, you can. If you steal someone's 4 tons of gold and you get caught with it, they're probably going to put 2 and 2 together. But if it goes through sufficiently enough hands and there's no way to prove that it was them, no one is ever going to end up with that gold one day and go, oh, I hope this doesn't contain some of those illegally obtained gold atoms, because all gold atoms are identical. That's just the way it works. And all sats are identical because they don't exist. Nothing could be identical until it only exists in an abstract sense. And then 1 kilometer literally equals 1 kilometer. 1 kilometer of road does not equal any other kilometer of road. They are unique, but that's different. That is just fundamentally not the same thing, right? Okay, so there are different kinds of attacks. I try not to get to... My understanding of it isn't actually that great when it comes to the various types of spam that's going on, because it just makes me sick even looking into how they work. Stamps is the one I talked about that deliberately and maliciously bloated the UTXO set. Ordinals is the one that takes advantage of the witness discount, and rather than creating fake public keys. There's one at the moment called Runes, which is just loads of op return. Those ones end up in ocean blocks, because are we going to kill op return? This comes back to the conversation around the cat flap. What do we want to do? Do we want to just get rid of the cat flap at this point? Because no one, you can use it if you want, but the reason it's there is to discourage people storing data in fake public keys. But fake public keys are far more expensive. Apart from stamps, no one is really doing it that way anymore. So they can if they want to attack, and we should probably close that hole too, but that's difficult. That's a soft fork, right? That's soft forking to a new address type that provably doesn't have fake public keys anymore. I think that would have to kill Taproot. All these things I'm considering, and it very much against my better judgment, where I don't want to fuck with Bitcoin at all. But there comes a trade-off point where I'm like, we're on such a bad trajectory with this that at some point we might have to risk breaking something to actually fix it. So, I don't want to be responsible for anything of that nature, right? I will say I've learned a lot of lessons. Taproot was something I was pushing for really hard. I didn't have as good an understanding of it as I should. It did have this issue that has allowed, a fake script to be put in as witness data, which is this op false, op if, op end if thing. And they put loads of data in this if condition that can never be executed. So you trick a node into thinking something is a bunch of script that it isn't invalid, that can never be used for anything, but is in reality is just a bunch of JPEG data or something like that. You hack it in like that. It's so ugly. It's such an ugly hack that it's obvious to anyone that uses it that you're using the system against what it was designed for. So I've gone over all that stuff. I've gone over the precedent. I've gone over the op return wars. I've gone over most of the context for why things are the way they are. I think there's also just like to sort of go off on another angle completely. You have the ETFs number go up, right? That's a pretty depressing thing because that's not your keys, not your coins. We don't. One of the parts of the fork wars, the the final resolution of the fork wars came as a result of a lot of heavy hitters in Bitcoin having control over their own funds, and it came down to people dumping the shit fork in a futures market. And you can only do that when you have control over your UTXOs, right? I mean, in the context where millions of Bitcoins are held by ETFs on behalf of other people, in another fork war scenario, it does come down to who the UTXO owners are. And if they're a bunch of, publicly traded American banks, that doesn't sound like a pretty good scenario. I'm not happy about it at all. It's no one should ever buy Bitcoin that way, but plenty of people are. Plenty of people are just seeking legitimacy or seeking approval even from the establishment because, they want to tell their, blue-pilled father-in-law, I told you Bitcoin was good. Look, Goldman Sachs is into it now. Like, fuck off with all that stuff. This is not what we're here for. Like, don't worry about looking legitimate to people that think we're all drug dealers. Like, let them think that and let them be broke in the future because they use stupid heuristics to to judge things. So that's pretty annoying. That's something which has been, concerning. But then there's also just America at the moment is just being insane and punitive, and not just America, but they're just going batshit about anything to do with Bitcoin. Like, if you've said the word at some point, you feel like you're going to have your door kicked in at 4 a.m. Like, it just feels like everyone just feels like there's a target on our back at the moment and people are scared to speak. That's no fun. I don't live in America, so I don't worry about it so much. But yeah, perhaps I'll get back to Luke for a bit. Luke is before all scripts were whitelisted, and Luke is the one that broke that open, which is basically the reason we're in the problem we are now. The reason we have to play games of cat and mouse with spam, which everyone says is so pointless, but it's not. It's actually pretty easy to do, and it's pretty winnable if you can just get people to stop being idiots. Before it was, no, if there's a new thing you want to do, we need to explicitly allow it. Now it's everything is allowed, and if something is being abused to spam the network, we can specifically whack that mole on the head. That's obviously shitty and not much fun. So that's the situation we're in right now. Basically, it was Luke's fault, because I think with Ocean V1, which was Eligius, that was what he started doing. He broke the whitelist model and made it the opposite. Now it's a blacklist model, which is one where you're a lot more reactionary and you're on the back foot. But nonetheless, I still think it's winnable. And finally, I guess, that's the one elephant in the room I haven't spoken about yet in this video, which is, I did start talking about it when I talked about how hard it is becoming to run a node. So I'm about to do another benchmark, this time with an NVMe. I've got a Raspberry Pi 5 back there. I've tried a couple of different USB drives with it. It will get up to 2023, which is when the spam started. The spam really started in Feb 2023, and there's a website called What the Fuck Happened in Feb 2023. I advise you to go look that up, WTF, and I think it's .com. I don't think it's .org. There's a website that goes into it, but that's about where it started. And I can get up to 2023 on that Raspberry Pi 5 in like 10 hours, which is so fast. And that is technological progress, right? That took 48 hours on a Raspberry Pi 4. Now it takes like 10 hours. And then once it hits 2023, okay, assume valid is no longer, you've reached a checkpoint, so things are going to take longer. It always slowed down a lot on the last year or so in any IBD, but it's insane. You get 10 hours to get to a year ago, then another 90 hours to get that last year done. If you carry on with each year being the way last year was, within 4 or 5 years, you're going to need really powerful hardware to sync the Bitcoin nodes, to sync new Bitcoin nodes. That's no good. But this was always a problem. Luke is the only guy out there that's been saying we need 300 kilobyte blocks. And this is where the spam weirdly, has actually been really helpful, because 300 kilobyte blocks sounds frightening because it's 30% of the size, depending on what you do with the witness data. I don't really know whether we kill that or not, the witness discount. Some more discussion to be had with Giacomo and Francis and these people there. And Luke, there's not really much consensus there among these few Bitcoiners that I trust. But 300 kilobyte blocks was intolerable, instinctively to all of us, because blocks are full and they're full of transactions and they'll get more expensive, right? If we make the block size smaller. This is it sounds like a very reasonable assumption, right? But Luke always maintained that that's not true. And he's usually right. And I've never understood why he was right. But now the spam comes along, and guess what? We have 300 kilobyte blocks. We just have really big blocks too. They're just full of crap. But in your average block, most of it is arbitrary data right now. So 300 kilobyte blocks, assuming we just want to use the blockchain for what it's actually for, which is financial records, we're making do with 100, 200, 300 kilobytes right now, and apparently it's fine. So apparently 300 kilobytes blocks are fine. So if you have a soft fork where you do a 300 kilobyte, you decrease the limit to 300 kilobytes, which is easy to do. It's not like making the block size bigger. Making the block size smaller is a very easy soft fork to do. Technically, it's going to be a massive fight to get this thing happening. But spam has proved that we can make do with it, apparently. And it's what's necessary to stop the blockchain from becoming just a complete nightmare. 300 kilobyte blocks has always been the conservative or reasonable, I would say. The optimistic approach doesn't work. So when I did my benchmark the other day, I saw a few people tweet like, "Oh my God, it takes me 3 days to sync my Bitcoin node. Oh, what am I going to do? Hardware never improves." I'm like, really? That's the sort of facile shit people are throwing out there. It gets bigger and more unwieldy every year. You need technology to improve at pace with the growth of the chain and the UTXO set, or outpace it. At the moment, we're slower. So as I said, the Raspberry Pi, double the power CPU. Even the drive is faster than what I would have used 2 or 3 years ago. And it can't keep up. We've gone from 48 hours to sync to 100 hours to sync. I'm very curious about what the NVMe does, but the benchmarking is showing that the blockchain is growing too fast. Bitcoin is becoming unsyncable. And if that happens, that is code red. That is Bitcoin is broken, everyone. And if that's true, and the spam helped us identify this problem faster than we otherwise would have, then I'm grateful the whole thing happened the way it happened. But we need to actually fix it. And I'm not confident that we can, because people are just fucking idiots at the moment. And I'm very, very dismayed by the low quality of what I see. There are people that I've known and have been friends with for years in the Bitcoin space that I just cannot forgive for the corruption I see that has crept in and the complete distortion of values. I mean, it happens to a lot of people. There's a lot of people that have done good work in Bitcoin, and they just apparently seem to lose their sanity. Like Gavin's the best example, right? He was a good developer that did some good stuff in Bitcoin, and then one day Craig Wright is Satoshi and we need gigameg blocks. What happened? I don't know. Did someone slip something into your tea one night or something? I don't get it. But I've seen this happen to a lot of people now, and it's disheartening. And I hope it hasn't happened to me. Some people presumably think I am on the wrong side of all this because I want to censor transactions and all this stuff. And I'm explaining. I hope I've done a good job in this video of explaining what I want to do. If it's censorship, then Bitcoin has always been a censorship engine. But it's not. We're just trying to design a system where it can only be used in the way that helps the system overall, rather than something that undermines it via some ugly hack that brings the whole thing to its knees, and we just ideologically fall on our sword and go, well, we never censored anything. We let it be a complete free-for-all. And the high street's just full of, boats and giraffes walking down the thing when you're like, this was supposed to be for cars. Now there are no cars, and I don't want to be in this fucking city anymore. And you leave, and it just becomes dead. That's basically what I see happening. So, yeah, 300 kilobyte blocks seem totally reasonable at this point. And once upon a time, the people I'm now fighting with did actually agree on that. So I'll take, just like we used to compare Jeff Garzik from 2014 to Jeff Garzik in 2016, when he would just say things that directly, it was like he had a personality transplant, like sensible, conservative, intelligent, brave Bitcoiner versus corporate whore trying to attempt corporate takeover of Bitcoin with technical nonsense, hand waving all of the issues that would come around ramping up block size and making the whole thing hard forked every now and again, far too often with, basically a top down planning kind of, architecture. No thanks. It was funny, and now I see that I'm dancing around it because I don't really want to name names here, but I've just seen a few people that I'm just like, wow, I've learned a lot about Bitcoin from you. You're an incredibly intelligent person. I know you know what you're talking about. And I'm like arm wrestling you, and it's like arm wrestling a noodle. I'm like, is that it? Like, what happened to you, dude? Like, there's plenty of discussions willing to be had around what I want Bitcoin to look like and what Ocean is doing. But when it comes down to it, the arguments I get into with people, I'm like, really, is that all you got? Like, I'm disappointed, right? Maybe I play a lot of chess. I like playing chess, and when my opponent makes crap moves, it's always disappointing. You don't want to win chess because your opponent sucked, right? So that's kind of how I feel debating a lot of these people in Bitcoin at the moment. And that sounds, I realize looking back on that sounds very arrogant. But at the same time, it's not that I'm like amazingly deep in my understanding of Bitcoin or super clever or anything. It's just that I'm not actually corrupt. That's the difference. And that sounds kind of arrogant too, but I genuinely don't care what happens with Bitcoin. If it's going to be a crappy system, if it's going to end up being nothing like what it could have been, I'm just not here for that. I'm a passionate advocate for what Bitcoin can do if it's used the right way, and if we treat it with the care and respect it deserves. And people are just so used to dealing with no coiners and shit coiners all day that they're just like, oh, nothing can hurt Bitcoin, it's perfect, nothing can bring it down, it's an invincible system. And I'm like, dude, it's under attack and it's being brought to its knees, and we're undermining all of the things that separate it from shitcoins and fiat. We're losing all of this stuff. Are you fucking paying attention? Because no one seems to be. And I find it sad. And I've had my euphoric moments and my epiphanies before, and any sort of spiritual wisdom tells me to stop worrying about it, and it's going to be fine. And you can't do anything to control this thing anyway, and let go, learn to enjoy the ride and all that stuff. Sorry, man. I feel like I'm too close to it to resort to stuff like that. I can't do it. And I know there's plenty of people that feel the same. Like I have a lot of messages all the time from people, just random Bitcoiners, just being like, I agree with you, and I didn't before, and now I've heard your perspective on it, and I agree. So it's good. And I haven't heard of anyone that's sort of in this slowly growing group of people that agree that Bitcoin's on a bad trajectory, that have gone, actually, screw it, I disagree suddenly. Like, I haven't seen that, and I have seen a lot of burnt people in the whole shitcoins on Bitcoin phenomenon that's kicked off just over a year ago. So yeah, what are we in right now? Like, I haven't even got into, this is the first video I've done on this channel, I think, since I joined Ocean, and obviously I've been preoccupied with that. All I do is talk about what's specific to the mining space in my capacity at Ocean. Obviously, I talk about all the stuff I've talked about in this video too, because Ocean is basically at the front of that fight against spam. And NOTs, which is the node we use, the implementation we use, does default to 300 kilobyte blocks, but the Ocean default template doesn't do that. It's nice to know that, Luke isn't going to pick every single battle at once. Like, we launched a pool on hard mode as it is, because it's very hard to get the initial bootstrap out of the way when you launch a pool, and we're still in bootstrap at the moment. It's very stressful running a pool with very low hash rate because it's very big, long gaps between blocks. Variance is a killer. Like, we went 3 weeks or something without a block. That is really hard. And you're telling your miners every day, don't worry, RNGesus will give us a block soon. Like, it's stressful, right? And yeah, like I'm saying, if we'd done 300 kilobyte blocks too, I think it would have just been, there's like climbing a cliff, like a 1 degree angle. Like, if you want to climb the whole thing and you're literally like a negative degree where you have to actually climb backwards to get up the thing. Like, I don't think Luke's that nuts, thank God. So yeah, like I'm not going to get into mining in this video. It's horrifically long as it is anyway. And there's just so much talk about it anyway. Maybe I'll make a brief point about it, which will be, 45 minutes probably, knowing me. Like, there's increasingly only one pool. Bitmain basically run the show. I think I wanted to point this out. So once upon a time, Bitmain, if you don't know, they're sort of one of the biggest enemies in Bitcoin that there's been, but they actually manufacture all the mining hardware, nearly all of it. About 90% of what's connected to the Ocean Pool is Antminers, which is manufactured by Bitmain. And they're all closed source, and they've been caught with bugs or backdoors in them before, which they lied about. But once upon a time, when getting back to Segwit, when they wanted to block the Segwit upgrade, it turned out that their main motivation for doing it was that they were rolling Merkle roots instead of nonces. And that is a more efficient way, kind of a bug in SHA-256 really, and it gave them this advantage and meant they could use less electricity when mining. And it put KNC out of business, that was a rival, and KNC went out of business, and when they did, they said, those guys seem to have some advantage, we can't figure out what it is. And that was that, and it turned out that, Segwit broke their ability to grind Merkle roots. And it would mean that if they wanted to carry on doing this, they would have to resort to another, more efficient method, but it would be obvious what they were doing. And this was grinding version bits instead. And this was all called ASIC boost or ASIC boost. And when Greg Maxwell discovered that they were doing this, they denied it, they lied about it. It was obvious that this was why they were blocking the upgrade. And then the minute we did the upgrade anyway, they immediately started grinding version bits, as did everyone else. So it was obvious that they were lying about it, and it was obvious they were trying to hold the whole network to ransom over it. And they run the biggest pool. And what's worse about that is it doesn't currently look like it is the biggest pool because they make it look smaller than it is. Everyone knows 51% attacks are bad. People have grown complacent again, though. They don't really care about pools that have 30% or so. So pools nowadays are too intelligent to let themselves look bigger than 30%. Foundry seem to be pretty decent people as far as I can tell. They're incredibly compliant, and, at that size, it's pretty inevitable. But as far as I can tell, they're not part of this cartel. Everyone else pretty much is, though. Because a lot of the smaller sub-pools have been found to just be proxies for Bitmain anyway. So when you're looking at Ant Pool, which is Bitmain's biggest pool, which is like 25 to 30% of the network, they may not look like they're any bigger than that, but in reality, two things have been found. One is that rewards from blocks that are found by 10 pools, one of which is Ant Pool, are all going to the same custodian. So that means that there is not the degree of separation you would really want there, but more of a smoking gun is the fact that even the templates that these pools are constructing are all informed by Antpool's transaction accelerator, which means that the blocks, the content of the blockchain, more than 50% of it is being defined by one company, and more than 50% of the rewards of all freshly created coins are going into the same pair of hands. At this point, you're looking at someone with the ability to do a 51% attack, and you're just hoping that they don't do it. That's not... The Bitcoin I know was different, because back in the day when Ghash got over 40% of the hash rate, and it was just obvious that they had that much, the pool just died as a result, because people don't want to put Bitcoin in that vulnerable of a position where one entity has that much control over what goes in the blockchain, what comes out of the blockchain, even because all that matters, right? It doesn't matter if the miners and the hashes making up these pools are all over the planet and decentralized as hell. Those miners still have no say over what goes in the chain or what comes out of it. In fact, they're all... I'm not going to get into FPPS here because all I do is dunk on it. But Ocean is hopefully going to win all this because we pay a lot more. The centralized nature of what's going on with mining pools and hardware at the moment means they're very sloppy, they're very lazy, and there seems to just be a lot. How do I put this in a way where if I'm suddenly 100 times more famous, I don't get sued? There is a formula by which you are supposed to be, by which there is supposed to be a way to define how much a miner mining on any pool should be paid at any given time based on how much they contribute towards, towards how much work they do that's issued to them by the pool. And this is basically the dominant payout mechanism that miners and pools are using at the moment, and it's called FPPS. And it basically says we have nothing to do with the blockchain. We are not in any way concerned about what goes on the blockchain as a miner. Put whatever you like in blocks. Pay yourselves, the pool, pay yourselves out of the block reward. And as a miner, I will accept some basic rate of income based on how much hash I'm sending to you. I don't care if you find any blocks or not. Just here's my hash rate and here's how much how much are you going to pay me for it? And the pool says, well, based on the last 24 hours of blocks, blah, 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 and based on the network difficulty, this is how much sats you're owed. Here you go. Miners love it because they get paid no matter what. This is incredibly naive because that is an insurance type of product that says Bitcoin's random. You don't know when you're going to get any money. You don't want to solo mine. Let the pool go and deal with the blockchain. You don't need to pay any regard to what goes in it and what comes out of it. You just need the pool to pay you what you think you're worth. The trouble with this is it's opaque. There's no way for you to connect the dots between this much was mined in the blocks found by this pool and I got this much Bitcoin. Something's not right here. There's a really, really hard calculation to do because there's too many unknowns in it. And the people I know, Ocean haters, have come out and said, well, all the other pools seem to be stealing around 4 to 5%. So Ocean, unbelievably, I cannot believe the discrepancy. And because I wouldn't let myself believe that it was this bad. So again, trying not to get sued here. People are saying, oh, the FPPS pools. I haven't said this because I don't mind with FPPS pools and I don't have the data. Ocean's transparent. You know how much every miner got and you know how much hash they contributed. With the other pools, here's the formula. We're supposed to pay you this much and you got that much instead. And again, I keep saying it's like this airport currency exchanges that tell you they're charging 0% commission. But you give them $1 and you get $1.03 Canadian, and you're like, the exchange rate is $1.32. Where's the 30 cents going from? Where's the 29 cents disappearing? You said you're 0% commission. They're like, oh yeah, but we use this rate. And I'm like, where did that rate come from? Because it seems to be a sort of justification for you to rob me blind. That's basically what I'm seeing with the competition, and my sort of cope with it, if I want to be generous to the competition here, is saying there's so many pools out there that how could any one of them rob their miners that badly? How could they get away with it? Well, they could if there were way fewer than it really looked like. And I used that analogy of those restaurants that all, like when there's like 10 Indian restaurants in a row and there's only one kitchen. So you spend ages going like looking at different menus going, should we go in that one? Oh, this guy is hustling us in here. He's going to give us a discount. They'll give us free drinks. They'll give us the first beer free. Oh, but that guy's going to give us a cocktail. And then you go in one and you realize, wait a minute, all of these restaurants have the same kitchen staff. This is a scam. That's how mining feels at the moment. It just feels like there's only one big pool that also is the manufacturer of all the hardware and is also that company that tried to attack and tried to break an essential upgrade in order to carry on using its advantage that it had patented, but lied that they weren't using it. And then it was pretty obvious they were using it once we did the upgrade anyway, and they had to switch to an alternative way of doing it. All that tells me Bitmain's way too powerful and no one cares about it. I'm not saying no one cares about it. Actually, I take that back because there's plenty of people that are kicking up a stink about how centralized mining is right now. But there's not nearly enough energy in it. Ocean is the only really credible way of taking down these Goliaths. and we have 0.2% of the network hash rate, which is just pitiful. But we do have a catch-22. When we have more hash rate, we will get more hash rate. No one wants to join a party if there's only 2 people there and they're both dudes. So this is basically the scenario. That's my state of the Bitcoin. Maybe that's my yearly video, which justifies the horrifically long waffle that this has turned into. I'm really hoping it actually recorded right. I haven't recorded for so long. Yeah, mining is pretty horrific at the moment. I'm hoping that, that we come to our senses. Ideally, what I'd like to see is 300 kilobyte blocks. I'd like to see serious attitudes around spam. Just enough people saying we don't want this shit is enough to make these grifters and scam coiners fuck off back to Ethereum. I'd like to see hashers move their hash rate over to Ocean. Really hard for me to say that because I work there, but it's not like I'm on a direct commission. I don't make more money when miners join the pool. I just get paid when I get paid. And I would like to see people go back to not your keys, not your coins. And the one thing I didn't touch on in this whole video, mining didn't take that long, did it? Maybe I should touch on one more subject, is upgrades, soft forks, CAT, CTV, checksig from stack, covenants, all this stuff, APO. I mean, I've done stuff on this channel before. There's a long interview with Moonsettler going into the technical stuff on it. On a social level, I'm incredibly unwilling to do any upgrades at the moment because I think people are fucking around and I think people are not prepared to take problems seriously anymore. They just want more toys. And Lightning has been a very, very disappointing but sobering thing for me after having worked at Start9 for so long, which was the serious approach to plebs running Lightning nodes and managing their own channels. Yeah, we worked so hard for so many years trying to make that a reality, and it's barely happened. 1% of Bitcoiners use Lightning, and 1% of those Lightning users actually run a node and manage their own channels. If that's all we can do with that, I'm not about to start adding 3 opcodes to start doing more sophisticated things where, there's a potential for 8,000 other ways in which you can start stowing and stashing arbitrary data inside Bitcoin. That just means not only do, like, me and Luke and the Ocean guys will be begging to stay where we are right now, which is already completely broken. I don't want to start backsliding now and getting even worse. That would be fucked. So right now I'm saying it's the Donald Trump moment. Like, I don't want any more until we figure out what the hell is going on. Like, basically that's where I am with the upgrades. Like, we have glaring holes in what happened with Segwit and Taproot. We need to address those. If we can't, I do not trust this network to start adding opcodes. I'm sorry, it's just not tenable in the current environment. People are not being serious. People are treating this thing like it's a fucking toy. They are undermining it and they are watching it be burnt down, and they're coping with empty platitudes around saying Bitcoin is for enemies and you want to control other people and censorship is bad and yada, yada, yada. All of these things that just sound good on the surface, but when you know anything about making any infrastructure that's actually remotely functional, you're saying you guys have zero pragmatism in you at all. And calling something a slippery slope can be a valid appeal to a principle, or it can just be an admission that someone wants to do something that needs to be done, but that if they were to do that thing in different circumstances, it would be bad. That it's a fallacy. The slippery slope argument is a fallacy. And it doesn't apply to spam filtration anyway, because we've always fucking done it. So the worst thing is, the practical way to censor Bitcoin is to flood the chain with crap so that no one can afford to use it anymore before any of the technology is ready for us to be able to use it. That sounds like it contradicts what I said about adding covenants and opcodes, right? But it's a minefield, right? And I know that it all sounds a little bit inconsistent to people that are, on the level, like, into Bitcoin as passionately as I am. I'm sure there are people out there that disagree with me and how I have my priorities stacked up. But I think I've laid it out in this video from the bottom up. It really does come around node orientation. If you lose that, I don't think you can say we're, a decentralized currency that can only ever be 21 million. all these things that we use as this like base rationale for saying we are special, we are the divine, immaculate conception, we are the perfect thing. Like, if you're going to fuck it up, the best way to do it is by disregarding the people that enforce the entire protocol. If you start throwing them to the side, it's just like the English language metaphor I love to use. Like, if you're saying English is great because it can do this and that, and like, imagine you're celebrating English and you're not just taking it for granted one day. Imagine English, you're like, there's 1 billion people that use this thing to communicate every day, and it's incredible. There's all these books written, and there's like all this wisdom, and there's this, there's this subject called geography and history, and it's all there because of this thing called English we can use to communicate it to one another. Like, imagine if you were that excited about English and someone was like, yeah, every year there's 100,000 fewer people speaking it. Like, imagine if you just ignored that. Like, anyone with any knowledge would go, that's a dying language. And if it just exists in a few dictionaries in various universities around the world, but no one speaks it, it's centralized and it's just arbitrarily changeable at that point. And it's not useful anymore. It's a dead language. The languages are protocols. Bitcoin can have exactly the same thing done to it. And the English speakers of the Bitcoin protocol are the node runners, not the miners, not the devs, not any other contingent, not any other constituent. It's the nodes. So if you attack nodes, if you treat them like arbitrary data storage, like Michael Saylor wants to with his new DID thing, if you treat them, if you treat the people running the nodes as financial users that now have to compete with extraneous use cases of the blockchain that violate all of the intentions of the things we did, like op return, if you're going to come along and wrestle the whole thing from the hands of the people that have created it for a very specific function, you have to watch it be not good at one thing. It stops being good at one thing and becomes shitty at a bunch of things. That's just a path to nowhere. That's where I end the video. Thanks.